Well, I'm delighted to introduce Sir Ian Livingstone, the man, the legend, the game designing guru god, um, who I've known for quite some time. And ordinarily, we talk about fighting fantasy, which and Dungeons and Dragons, which is still going, and you're still writing them. And I think last time I spoke to you, you were going to be doing a sequel to Death Trap Dungeon, and you did. You brought it out. Was it last year?
Yes, the Dungeon on Blood Island came out in 2024, and it was, people love Death Trap Dungeon, and they liked Trial of Champions, and so I thought, well, we might as well go back to the well again and give them another dose.
Yes.
This Carnage Underground, where you compete against others and try and survive and get out alive. Hopefully, nobody can, but they'll die trying, literally. But
I had a great reception, I think, and
it
people really
has, yeah.
enjoyed it. And they want another one, Ian, as always.
Well, I'm so delighted that they survived the test of time. The Ball of Fire Top Mountain came out in 1982, and Fighting Fantasy, branching narrative with the game system has really touched the hearts of millions, and it kind of speaks to the young generation of today who want everything to be interactive and to have control, and participation leads to achievement. So the fact that it's all about you being the reader, being the hero, I think it's a far more compelling experience for today's digital generation than traditional linear types of entertainment.
It is, absolutely. Well, we're here today at the Tenby Games Festival, and it's set up by the Pembrokeshire Wargaming Society. And of
Right.
course, Games Workshop kind of started as wargaming, didn't it? And before Dungeons and Dragons fell on your desk.
Well, the Games Workshop was started by three school friends, of which I was one of them. It was Steve Jackson, John Peake, and myself, and we had pretty boring jobs in living in London. We all originally came from near Manchester. We attended Altrincham Grammar School, but we all had a love of board games and pretty fed up with the kind of games you could buy in the UK, mainly traditional family board games like Monopoly and Cluedo and the like. Although there was a couple of American games that we discovered that were amazing and different, and they really inspired us to want try and do something different. Those were games like Diplomacy and some of the Avalon Hill war games. But so we decided to start a company which we call Games Workshop, largely because John, who was a civil engineer by trade, but also a great carpenter who made backgammon boards, which he sell to his colleagues, and we decided to try and sell them to shops, which we did. So we started off in a kind of a traditional way, but we were playing these war games in our flat, which we stayed in a lot because we were pitifully paid. So our entertainment was through playing board games, and we published a newsletter which we sent out to everybody we knew in games, and Alan Weasel. And one luckily found its way onto the desk of Gary Gygax, who'd invented Dungeons and Dragons, even though we didn't know him or the game. And he wrote to us enclosing a copy of the game and said, "What do you think about this?" And I mean, it's a pretty ordinary box, white box with a very amateurish illustration on the cover. And but when you open that box, it opened up your imagination like no game had ever done before, and I don't think any game ever will again. The first role-playing game. This was in January 1975, and we were just bowled over by this concept of role playing. So rather than playing the role as a general in control of armies, which we were doing in tabletop games and some board games, suddenly it was all about you, one person, guiding yourself through a perilous quest of exploring a labyrinth of rooms and passageways populated with flesh-eating monsters and traps that will mangle you up in multiple ways. Directed by the dungeon master who told the story, and you reacted to it as a group, as characters, as thieves, wizards, heroes, clerics, etc. And through conversation, effectively theatre on the fly, you'd explore these dungeons and hopefully succeed and get the loot and escape and level up and progress attached to your alter ego, which was your character. And that's really how Workshop started before Warhammer and before, and And before the board games that we published, it was really about D&D, which we sold through mail order. And slowly but slowly, we managed to turn our hobby into a real business. John left
Yeah.
because he didn't like role-playing games, but Steve and I persevered. And even though we had to live in a van for 3 months and all that sort of entrepreneurial hardship,
It was
we,
worth it.
it was worth it. And we opened our first shop in 78 and started White Dwarf in 1977, started Citadel Miniatures in 1978 with Brian Ansell, and ultimately led to the publication of Warhammer in the 80s.
And that seems quite, quite a lot jammed into, a relatively short amount of time. When you think of the impact it suddenly had,
Yeah,
from
and
being in the
also,
van to
yeah,
lines around the block, and
and at the same time also writing Fighting Fantasy game books, which became a
yes,
bestsellers, and Penguin Books requiring us to go on author tours around the world and try and put out 3 or 4 books a year. I mean, those were completely mad times.
yeah, God, okay. So, I mean, looking around this convention, there are so many people role playing still, all ages, which is fantastic to see, every gender, and also, there's a lot of people who obviously love Warhammer now, and Warhammer's got a huge thing
Yeah.
for this society. Um, can you remember how it came about, how it was kind of presented to you, and what the
Yes,
process
indeed.
was?
Well, it was really a chain of events led to Warhammer. We were publishing Dungeons and Dragons under license. We had a very good relationship with Gary Gygax and his company TSR Hobbies. But we only had this license for 3 years, at the end of which Gary came over to the UK and said he wanted to merge Games Workshop and TSR. And Steve and I, being kind of still young at that time and independently minded Brits, said no to that merger. And he said, "Well, we will have to set up TSR Hobbies UK if you say no." But we were determined to stay independent. We didn't want to spend half our lives in the US and half in London at that time. And so we said no. And that meant we were suddenly vulnerable. We remained a distributor of Dungeons and Dragons, but no longer the exclusive distributor. So we realized we had to start publishing our own games to try and replace D&D and find a game that had the potential to scale like Dungeons and Dragons was doing, a real household name that would succeed over time. So we published a number of board games like Talisman and Apocalypse and some licensed games like Judge Dredd and Doctor Who. And we published American games under license, role-playing games like Call of Cthulhu and Traveller and others. But they weren't as big as D&D. And at the same time, Brian Ansell was saying to us, I want to sell more miniatures. I need to sell more citadels. It's all I'm doing at the moment is selling, one giant rat, one spider, one wizard to people. And I'd like to sell armies if possible.
Yeah,
That makes a lot more sense as a company. And so he had an idea. He had previously designed a set of rules called Laser Bum, and he had an idea for a tabletop battle game using Citadel miniatures. And the initial idea was to give the rules away free with mail orders as a like a 1 or 2 page flyer.
yeah,
Um, but as they were written down, there was potential seen in expanding that into an actual game itself. So he brought in Richard Halliwell and Rick Priestley to flesh them out, which they did from his initial concepts and his initial designs. And that led to Warhammer Fantasy Battle coming out in 1983. It was printed 3,000 copies, promoted it through White Dwarf magazine, distributed through the shops, and it sold out pretty quickly. And so
wow,
Brian, always wanting to invest and raise production values as soon as possible, did the second edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battle in the red box, and that sold out. And so he put a larger team led by Rick and Richard to then create uh, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, which came out a couple of years later, and ultimately gave Rick Priestley the go-ahead to be in charge of creating what was originally Rogue Trader, which became Warhammer 40K, which came out in 1987 as a hardback book. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Wow, God. And did you how did you play test it? Did you play it as a company, or is it play tested separately, or did you how hands-on were you seeing the actual game, and did you play
Well, our
yourselves?
head office, the Games Workshop head office, was in London. So Steve and I were in London whilst we traveled around the country
Hmm.
um, a lot. We weren't always in Nottingham, where Citadel was, to be able to get involved so much in the development. So we can't really claim much credit for the design of Warhammer as such.
Yeah,
But we were there kind of giving it the green light process and support and approval process to make sure it realizes its own potential. And of course, as soon as Warhammer took off, there was more of a desire from Citadel to say, we want more um, support and financial backing here and less in London. So there's a bit of a battle for what was then still limited resources of capital. But we need to worry as everyone's seen how big Games Workshop is today. But of course, it's all in the back of Warhammer.
yeah,
And interestingly, all the shops are now being branded as Warhammer, and Games Workshop as a name is really the City of London facing company name for the stock market. And Warhammer is now the consumer brand for shops and of course the games.
wow. Okay, that's quite a change, isn't it? I wonder, is it? I don't know if it's bigger than Dungeons and Dragons. It's probably on equal pegging now, I'd imagine. It's not far off.
Well, I don't know the total revenues of D&D these days. I'm not privy to Hasbro's figures, but um, clearly Warhammer is doing exceptionally well because the company is now worth 5.4 billion pounds on the London Stock Exchange.
Wow, wow, extraordinary.
But we
Now,
left 1991. We don't have stock anymore.
no, no, that's yes, but I mean, it must feel like one of your babies though, going off and maturing,
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
well.
still nice. It sounds really like as proud parents this this child has left home and grown. You just stand on the sidelines and go, "Wow, I wasn't expecting that, but well done."
Are there any games that you've thought were amazing and maybe overlooked that you would have hoped to have been more successful? Things that you kind of thought, oh, actually that's going to do amazingly, and it didn't for some reason.
I
Or
mean, talking about workshop games.
yes, yeah,
We were hoping some of the board games might have become bigger than they were. I mean, Apocalypse is an incredible game, designed originally under the name of The Warlord by a a Sheffield University lecturer called Mike Hayes, and essentially it looks like Risk, but Risk is just grabbing a great handful of dice and throwing them and hoping for the best.
yeah,
Whereas the combat system in Apocalypse is really, really cool, and it's trying to use a system where you have to outthink your opponent rather than roll higher dice, and
yeah,
it's using dice, but it's you're trying to guesstimate what the other person is going to do, and you can see the stats of in your head of what they would happen if they do what you think they're going to do. So it's like if he thinks that, I think that, he thinks that, I think that, she thinks that, blah blah, and you kind of get stuck in
yeah.
this in
So a
this
bit of a
terrible
chess
loop.
kind of 3D
Yeah,
chess thinking.
it's a very clever combat system.
Is that one that could possibly get sort of repackaged and relaunched in some way? And would you be interested in doing that?
Well, I don't know. I think the rights reverted to Mike, and I haven't spoken to Mike for about 10 years or so. But
Well, if he's watching this,
you
bring it
never know.
out again, Mike.
Yeah. And non-war games that should have done better and could have done better and clearly did better for anyone else for another company. I think it was Hasbro. Is that we published a game called Tower Blocks, and I actually have it right here, and I can show
Oh
you.
wow.
Um, see, this actually came out before Jenga.
Oh. Okay, that looks, yes, suspiciously familiar.
And I think we sold 1,000 copies of it, and I think they probably sold about 8 million copies of Jenga.
Yeah,
So with the
wow.
right distribution channel and the right tailwind, that could have been hugely successful. But it didn't really fit with our product range, and we're not a mass market games company at that point. And
Yeah.
putting them in hobby shops was never going to do it. But clearly, it was a format that worked elsewhere for
It
others.
was. It was a great idea. Now, can you remember the very first game that you designed?
Uh, the very first game I designed. Well, the one I remember that was popular that I designed rather than the rubbish ones I designed.
Well, I'd quite like to hear about the rubbish first one as well. Okay, we'll go with that one.
Did one that was published by an American company called The Barbarian. That's less said about that, the better. Uh, Battle Cars was okay. That's quite
That was a great
successful.
game. Yeah, remember that.
Um, Designed that with Gary Chalk. The Judge Dredd board game was probably the most popular one. I did that. That was all my own whole design. I mean, it's not a heavy game. It's quite a light game. It kind of speaks to the essence of the comic, which I was a huge fan of.
Is that out again? Has it been reissued?
Yes, it's been republished by Rebellion.
Rebellion, yes.
Um, and so you could catch Judge Death for littering. I mean, it's very funny. The events that could come up through the way the cards fell, and so he just tore around Mega City One trying to arrest people and score points for doing that.
And what's the most recent game you designed that
But
you
I
can
did a
tell us
couple
about?
of games which I self-published, Boomtown and Automania.
Yeah.
Town was quite successful. You were trying to own the best property in town, and the way you attack your opponents' property value is to stick terrible things in their neighborhood, like abattoirs and junkyards and dumps and stuff, trying to lower the value of their prices while you're trying to put nice amenities like parks and
Is it something, game design, is it something that you involuntarily do? You just kind of think about it, or
I
you
just do
wake
it
up
all the
one night and go,
time.
I've got an idea.
I've got a
Eureka
book of
moment.
a book of lots of designs, and most of which will never come out. And I've got a drawer full of prototypes right here, but it's a question of time. I'm always never have enough time. I'm still writing game books. I'm still involved in the video games industry. It has been my life for the last 30 years.
Hmm,
Um, and I've got my own school, and I do a lot of public speaking and working with government on various things. So time has always been the enemy, and but I'll never retire. Work and play is the same for me.
absolutely. One final question. If someone's watching this and they're a budding game designer,
Yeah.
what advice would you give them?
Um, Play it, publish it, and see what happens, or at least make enough prototypes to get a fair analysis of it. Don't tinker with it forever. Um, if it's a failure, just recognize that failure, take your learnings, and move on quickly. And try to. There is something like 2,000 new games come out at Essen every year,
Hmm,
so it's very, very difficult um, to differentiate a game these days. The genres have been all covered. The mechanics and game systems seem to be all covered. There's obviously scope for new ideas and new ways of playing. So try not to be a Me Too product. Try and instill at least some magic fairy dust that makes me want to come back and play it, not just once, but twice, perhaps three times. So it's all about capturing how we behave as human beings. I don't want to get too nerdy about it, but there's this Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this kind of human needs that you need in your life. So in video games, it's things like crafting and survival has become very popular because that resonates with the human soul.
hmm.
And I think that's quite important. And you've got to have games that have lots of interaction. Hanging around for half an hour waiting for your turn is not going to work.
Yeah,
It's just too boring. And keep it simple and keep it short these days. We compete against time. The younger generation, the TikTok generation, have got an attention span of about 5 seconds. So there's no point, I don't think, in making games that last 5 hours. So,
yeah. You
I
don't
mean,
see too many role-playing games coming. There's a lot of board games, not many traditional style role-playing games like D&D. And there are a few obviously come out each year,
yeah.
but not on the same
If
level as.
okay, I'm being a bit flippant here, but for the games market per se, obviously people like playing for a long time as groups. But if you're looking to go to the mass market, then there's a different dynamic involved, and of course distribution. Now, the reason why there've been so many games published in recent years, the physical games, because the board games market was in dire straits when the internet came along originally and video games came along. Games shops closed, but ironically, the internet has saved the board games industry because all the new facilities available from crowdfunding like Kickstarter or GameFound, it's like a pre-sale. You can fund the cost of your game and have a pre-sale before you've even started making it, which is brilliant. Because in the old days, people say, I'm going to make a game, I'm going to print 5,000 copies, of which 4,900 ended up in your garage because you couldn't
Yes,
find a market for them. But with the internet, you can reach a global market and you can pre-sell your game. That's great. And then you can learn how to play online. Um, you can see every game that's been made on boardgamegeek.com. You can play digitally on boardgamearena.com, and you can buy games online through e-commerce. So there's a whole ecosystem for board games via the digital world in which we live. So that's enabled games that have never would have been made to be made in this day and age, which is fantastic.
it is. It's great to see it strong. It's stronger than ever. Ian, thank you so much for coming along.
A pleasure.
At Tenby Gaming Festival, thanks you enormously, and hope to see you here one day, perhaps. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Have
for your
fun
time.
out there, guys.
Thank you.